Hi, this is Roger, thanks for dropping by. Welcome to my Sunday chat. Welcome to the channel if you're new, and thank you very much if you're still here if you're old. I mean, been here a while, not old and creaky like unfortunately I am today. This is going to be relatively short because it's quite painful standing. All of those nice plants that Carole sent me are in the ground, and as a consequence of me doing what I usually do in such circumstances and wanting to get it all done in one go, my knees hurt like hell and my back hurts, and I'm only most comfortable sitting in my comfortable chair with my back support cushion and my knees bent, not with my weight on them, so we won't be standing around too long today. The plants are all in the ground, as I've said. I will do a tour around the garden when the legs are working properly, which will probably be by tomorrow. All these setbacks like this are only a temporary thing by doing something that you don't normally do, and instead of only doing a little bit at a time, we do it all at once. Do we learn? Do we hell? So anyway, we're not comfortable today. Yeah, thanks for my subscribers, thanks for all the people who leave comments, thanks for those who do a thumbs up. There's people watching that have probably never left a comment. Thanks to you too. At least you're there, you know, it's a view on the channel, they all count. And thanks to Sean Rice, a shout out to Sean, who rejoined the membership. Now, I don't get information as to why he was a member, then he wasn't, and now he is again. I've got a feeling it might be the only way to change levels on the YouTube membership. But for whatever reason Sean has rejoined, thank you. I haven't had any new members apart from that rejoin for a while now. I don't expect huge numbers of memberships on the channel. Quite honestly, the membership on the channel, YouTube take quite a horrendous chunk, quite honestly, whereas on the Patreon site, if you become a member on the Patreon site, it's the same sort of principle. It's a monthly contribution to the channel, but they take a much smaller chunk. It's actually quite reasonable for what they actually do, whereas YouTube are just greedy. Nonetheless, thanks whether you're a channel member or a Patreon member, or for those who do the one-off buy me a coffee stuff. It's all gratefully received. It all contributes to everything that's going on. It's all good stuff. I have to move every now and again. Ooh, not comfortable, not good at all. It's a good job there's some snooker on, at least there's something to watch on the boring TV. Right, obviously those plants were gratefully received. They've been dotted around the garden according to their needs. Now, most of those plants were woodland type plants that don't want to be in baking sun all day long. That limits the places they could go. But I've managed to find some places to put them, and we'll have a look at that possibly tomorrow. Right, what else is going on? Not a lot, quite honestly. My repotting schedule is moving along nicely. I don't believe there's anything urgent left in the potting arena. In the mounts there are some urgent things up there. My Cattleya cernua, what was sophronitis, is looking very poorly. And if I don't, what I need to do really, I think, is take it off the mount and then analyse what I've got. There will be dead bits to take off, so it'll end up in pieces, and then I have to think, do I put those pieces back on a mount, or do I try it in a pot? The problem with that plant is it remains dormant for about 6 months of the year, and it will be difficult to deal with it as a dormant plant in a pot, because you have to give it some water, and then that water hangs around in a pot, whereas in a mount it's just dry in a day, so it'll probably go back on a mount. We shall see, but it'll go on something different. It's on an unknown bark at the moment of some sort of deciduous tree that wasn't very big. The bark is wafer thin. The chances are the bark is rotting, which is not doing the plant any good. So there's some work on some of the mounts to do. A lot of them, it's a matter of trying to tease out the old moss and just replace it without detaching them from the mount. Unless they're loose, if they're loose on the mount, they can come off and be remounted. But there's some work to do there. What else? We've got our kikis on our a phyllum that have got to be planted up as separate plants. I'm not quite sure how I'm going to do those. Those are a bit of a nuisance because they're kikis. They hung downwards. They're all pushing up new growths that are pointing straight up. So if you straighten the kiki up, the new growth's pointing downwards, which means it can't go in a pot. So I've got to have a think about that. So that's a little, you know, complexity to deal with that we'll have a chat about. Yeah, that's about all really that's going on at the moment. Hannah would have loved to have been down this weekend. I didn't have enough notice to deal with that, but she has no garden and she loves helping out in my garden because it's the only opportunity she gets to do it. And she's missed out on planting all those plants. Hopefully she's coming down either next weekend or the weekend after. And there is still stuff to do in the garden. I've got lots of tubs with nothing in. They need planting up with some colourful plants for the bees and butterflies to help add some colour around the place, because it's very green out there but not a lot else. And most of the plants I've just planted up are late winter or spring plants, and then they disappear for the summer. The leaves die back and everything, then they come up again the next year. So they're not going to provide colour for the summer and the autumn. That's, you know, I need other things for that. We'll see what we can do. Right, spotlight today, because I don't want to be on my feet very long, I'm going to do Miltoniopsis. Yes, we'll do Miltoniopsis. I've only got a couple nowadays, I don't have a lot. This little one here is a primary cross, so close to a species. Most of the Miltoniopsis species, if I say Miltonia, smack me round the back of the head metaphorically, because I'm still getting people in the comments that are getting the two muddled up. Miltoniopsis and Miltonias are nowhere near the same plant. I think they're distantly related, but they come from totally different parts of the world, totally different environments, and need totally different care. Get them muddled up at your peril. Right, so this little Miltoniopsis primary cross, it's a cross between Vexillaria and Phalaenopsis. Yes, there is a Miltoniopsis called Phalaenopsis, the same as there's a Dendrobium called Phalaenopsis. There's a Phalaenopsis called Phalaenopsis as well. That's probably got some meaning in Greek or something or other that relates to something unlike how we see it. Anyway, the common trait with Miltoniopsis is they're cloud forest dwellers, so they don't like heat, they like cooler temperatures, they like some airflow, not a blast from a fan. That'll dehydrate them. They're very, very thin leaves, very thin. And they dehydrate easily. So cloud forest environment is what you've got to have up here. So constantly moist, not soggy. Now where they would come from, they would be classed as soggy, but they're soggy with fresh, clean water, constantly being replenished by mist, fog and drizzly rain. Well, you can't do that. So you tend to water, get them soaking wet, and then hope they don't stay soggy too long, because that water will go stale. Yeah. So ideally You want a media that holds some moisture but doesn't hold it for too long, because remember, these are cooler growers. If you're growing in cooler temperatures, you're not going to lose a lot through evaporation, are you? So anyway, that's a little primary cross, and as I said, most of the species are quite small. I think Vexillaria is quite a larger one, I'm not sure. But I think there's only 5 left in the wild now. You know, it's not a large genus by any means. Now this is a hybrid, basically. It has got a posh name. It is Red Knight Grail. It's an awarded plant. I've yet to see it bloom. It's recently been repotted, and it's gone into a mix of sphagnum moss, small bark and perlite. The combination of which will give me plenty of air around the roots, but it will also hold moisture for an amount of time. And while this type of dried sphagnum moss is fresh, even when it stays wet for some considerable time, the moisture that's in it doesn't go off. It doesn't go stale, which is good. Traits, colour. These are not your normal green of the normal Oncidium alliance. They would have to be called a grey green. And if you put them next to any other Oncidium type, I'll just grab one, totally at random. I know it's a miniature, but that's green. That's not, that's grey green. Yeah? So there is a difference. And it's noticeable when you get next to the others. They can grow quite vigorous, the hybrids, but they go downhill easily and quickly at the slightest thing that they're not happy with. The list of things they're not happy with is quite long. Heat, stale dry air, too much airflow, media dried out totally, media soggy, media going off, too much light, not enough light. Any one of those and they start to go down, either slowly or in some cases quite quickly. Pile in more than one of those on that list, like 2 or 3, and you're going to lose your plant. They are finicky, and it's because of the environment they come from. Now the hybrids on the go at the moment, especially those coming out of the Mather's Foundation, although they're not actually coming out yet, what they are doing is producing more vigorous, more tolerant Miltoniopsis that one day in the distant future may be released onto the market, so that they will be more like your normal Phalaenopsis that you grow in your home, that's incredibly tolerant and puts up with almost anything. That's their goal. They may never achieve it, but the closer they get, the better the plants on the market will be. As I said, at the moment, their breeding program, along with the Eric Young Foundation, is working towards those goals and have yet to achieve it fully. Little steps, little stages. I have a horrible feeling that there will be a consequence in those types of breeding programs. There's something a bit special about Miltoniopsis. When you get near your first one and you pick it up to have a close look at the blooms, the fragrance will hit you. Now I don't call it a really, really pleasant fragrance. I call it, it's okay. It's like a combination of roses. Roses have a distinctive smell. I know they're all different, slightly different, but it's all similar. And soap. And the fragrance for me is a combination of roses and soap. It could do without the soap bit. Nonetheless, they are fragrant in the main, and there are hybrids coming out onto the market now that have very little or no fragrance. The breeding program's losing the fragrance. This often happens. This happened in the gardening world, things I can think of. Roses, back to those. There's a lot of hybrid roses now have got little or no fragrance. Sweet peas, grown for their fragrance. The hybrids have much more blooms, much stronger plants, easier to grow, more tolerant. Bang goes the fragrance. So we'll have to wait and see. But what is precious on Miltoniopsis is the patterning, especially the splash patterns, the waterfall patterns on the blooms. I'll stick some pop-ups of some of the blooms. These aren't blooms on plants I've currently got, but if ever I've had a plant that blooms, I will have taken a picture in the main, and I keep them. I've got a folder called Orchids Lost, which is not necessarily orchids that have died, although quite a few have. Could be orchids that have gone on to somebody else. But they're orchids that I have had at one point in time. So we'll put a selection up. And there are some gorgeous patterns on Miltoniopsis, which is quite incredible considering the limited number of species that they had to work with. You know, what do you think? I think there were 6 in the wild once. One's now, I believe one is extinct in the wild. That doesn't mean to say it's gone from the world. There will be, you know, people that still have it in private collections. And I'm sure it's still available to contribute to breeding programs. Strange things happen. You cross these 2 species and get a hybrid. And then you cross that hybrid with perhaps a different species, or back to one of the originals and you get another hybrid. You keep doing these strange things to get what you want, bigger, better, brighter, whatever you're after, a certain colour that wasn't there before. And sometimes the plants get weaker. Sometimes they become ultra strong and vigorous, just something in the genes that cross really worked. Then that one gets put into the program. But unfortunately in the commercial world, you know, the mass producing world, sometimes you get a good bloom but you haven't got a good plant. The plant's not strong. And because of those blooms, they'll be put out onto the market. People buy them, dead chuffed with the blooms and possibly the fragrance, and they can't keep them alive. Once they've left the nursery, they've lost that perfect world. So you end up with some weaker plants on the market. Now, someone like Eric Young and the Mathers Foundation, they won't do, well, they don't sell plants anyway, but they wouldn't do that. They wouldn't introduce a plant that hasn't got some strength and some vigour in it. They would keep that out of the open market, possibly still use it in there. You know, if they managed to get a fantastic colour, but they weren't that happy with the plant, they would then cross that with a much more vigorous plant of a similar colour and see what comes out. You know, that's the game, the hybridisation game. Very long-winded. You know, if you're working on seed-based, you know, first of all you've got to have a bloom, 2 blooms on different plants open at the same time. The cross-pollination has got to work to create the seed pod. You've got to wait for that to ripen before you can, you know, produce the seeds. I don't know how long they spend in a flask, 6 months, a year, and then they come out as tiny little bits of green like that and have to be grown on possibly for 3 or 4 years to get another bloom to see whether it's any good. And it might not be. All that time's been used up to no avail. So it's a strange world, hybridisation world. Right, have I got any new blooms opening? Don't think so. Don't think so. New blooms. No, buds around, but oh yes, I've got one. I forgot to dig it out. And it's yet another example of a poor spike with a poor number of blooms based on the feed that was given to it last year and into the winter. And it's yet another example of not good. Especially for those who can remember what the spike was like last time round. Now this is Wildcat Bobcat. Last time round the spike was over 2 feet long, so you know 2/3 of a metre long, had several branches on it and probably about 20 blooms. And that's what we've got this time. And it's not like it's on a weak bulb. That's a nice big plump bulb, but it's a weak blooming. Let's hope the next time round it plumps up again. It does have its next new growth coming already. It has started. Hopefully that will push on. There's room for it to stay in that pot, so it doesn't need a repot. It can go on without being disturbed. But lovely attractive blooms, but not many of them. Not many at all. I'll leave that out now. I've got it out. I've forgotten to get that one out. It's only just opened basically. But yeah, 4 buds, maybe 5 on a spike with no branches. That's not what that plant's supposed to look like. But we've gone back to to a combination of feeds now, for reasons I'm happy with, and we'll progress this season. You know, because the new growth on this plant has got to push on and mature a bulb before the spike will start. So it'll do virtually all of that this year. So that'll be under this year's feeding programme. But we could use that as a reference. Providing nothing goes wrong with that plant and, you know, lose the roots or some rot sets in or something goes wrong with it. Providing nothing goes wrong with that plant, we'll have a look and see what next year's spike looks like. And we'll possibly come back to, I'll do a still of that plant, whole plant, not just the bloom, so that we can keep it for reference and have a look at what the spike looks like next time round. Because I'd like to prove the point, because at the moment it's totally unscientific and based on not much more than speculation, quite honestly. Right, so this environment out here, final changes. We're on 21 degrees for most of the day, and that's now a lot of hours. It goes down to 16 at night. I'm not changing that. But the night is getting shorter and shorter, so that, you know, maintaining that during the night is now not too much of a big deal. It's more of a big deal keeping the daytime temps up. But with the time it's getting light at the moment, which is pre 5 o'clock in the morning, so about 7 o'clock, 7:15, it goes up to 19 degrees, and then about 8:30 it goes up to 21 degrees, and it stays there till it starts to get dark. So I'm maintaining 21 for a lot of hours now, and there are signs of growth in various places. I think it's working. Yeah, I'm okay with that. We still have residual problems. My Dendrobium nesta, the canes that it grew last year were weak. They went into the winter weak, they weren't going to bloom anyway, and they rotted at the base. Luckily there was 2 kikis which I've planted up. They're not bad kikis. You know, they're green, they're still growing, they've got good roots, they will pick up. But 3 years from blooming, got to put on some, you know, 2 foot plus long canes before they're going to bloom, but at least it's not lost. But you know me, I'm not into this growing on young plants for years to try and get a blooming size. It's not my thing. But there are other things, you know, that have got buds pushing on and new growths in places. So swings and roundabouts. Some's working well, some's just about working, some's not working very good at all. But the number of those is getting less and less. They're either getting chucked out or they're pulling on, you know, it varies. Yeah, it's funny, I'm looking around, I was sure there was another bloom. Yes, there is, of course there is, you twit. But it's not very easy to get at. I will try. Will you lift out without knocking everything over? Ugh. Just about. Just about. First Cattleya for a very, very, very long time. I've had real troubles with these. Now, in an ideal world, The number of blooms on the top of this spike would probably be about 8 to 10. It's a cluster type. That's not a large cluster, but you know, given the problems I've had with my cattleyas, at least we've got some blooms. One bud blasted, which leaves 3, 6. They will all be open together. Now you know me, I like my red and I've got very little of it. So to have something red is good. And they are good red. It's a deep red, especially the lip. So we have got some new blooms. I'd forgotten all about that. And we'll leave that one down now it's out as well. Let's see if I can get to the tray. So the thing is, the cattleyas need the bright light, yes. But once the blooms are open, they don't need the bright light to get them to bloom because they've already done it, so they can put up with less light while you enjoy the blooms. Yeah. Not large blooms, and again, not as many blooms as there should be, and not as large as last time round. Getting the pattern here, nonetheless, the cattleya are in bloom. Don't see many of those nowadays. Never mind. If you think my Laelia anceps, that put up 3 spikes, one didn't even get to open, it rotted, just faded away, and the other 2 opened with 1 or 2 blooms. Well, a Laelia anceps should have 3 or 4 blooms per spike, 5 on a really good one. Now that should have been a mass blooming, that should have been stunning, but it didn't have the strength in it to sort of push it on. Ow! Oh, I'm going to have to sit down. I'll have to leave it at that, I think. My knees are really starting to creak now. Oh, it was great fun coming down the stairs this morning, hanging on to both sides this time. And Mojo was behind me, and if you ever watch a cat go down the stairs, they do it relatively quickly. I was actually in his way. He was getting all couldn't work out what to do because I couldn't get going this morning. Anyway, that's the Sunday chat done. And thanks to everybody who supports the channel and keeps it going and everything. Videos this week might be a little bit thin, especially longer ones. Some quick ones would be in order. I've got to get on with this talk now. And as I've said, I'm having to start from scratch. And I've deliberately not done anything this week on the grounds I wouldn't have been in the mood. I'd have been too annoyed. I'd have been, I've already done this once. So I thought we'll leave it, and today we'll have a lazy day, get this video done, and producing this video and everything else I need to do for YouTube is sitting in my computer chair, which is very comfortable with back support and everything, so that will be okay. The only thing I've got to stand up to do for the rest of the day really is the obvious. And getting my dinner, which is I roasted a chicken on Friday, and for dinner today, or tea, whichever you want to call it, it'll be about 4:45, 4:30, 4:45, and it'll be chicken breast, roast potatoes, green beans, peas, carrots, and some nice gravy with some added wine in to give it a bit of body. And it'll be very enjoyable, and it'll be sat down once I've cooked it. As I say, it's a good job there's some snooker on, at least I can justify sitting down and watching the snooker, it's important. Right, anyway, that'll do for today, because we are starting to hurt now. And I'll see you next time. Thanks for dropping by. And again, thanks for just being around. There's been some thinking back, literally yesterday evening. I was just going back over, the last couple of years. And I've had a lot of events that I could have done without. And if you go back prior to that time, there weren't any. Lucky, I suppose. Very, very long period without big stuff going wrong, big events that mess you up. And more recently we've been having a few, and it gets on your knees, but it's life. you know, at least I'm still getting up in the morning. I've got a roof over my head, I've got food to eat, and I've got some hobbies that I'm enjoying. So what am I moaning about? I've got no right to moan, apart from my knees and my back, and that's my own fault. I did that, you know. Right, see you next time. Thanks for dropping by yet again.